Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the August 5th regular meeting of Council. The City of Parksville recognizes the people of the Coast Salish Nations and their territory upon which we gather tonight with gratitude. First item on the agenda is the adoption of the minutes of the Council meeting of July the 20th, 2015. Do I have a mover and a seconder? Moved by Councillor Oates, seconded by Councillor Greer. Are there any errors or omissions? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Thank you. That is carried. The next item is the approval of the agenda. We have a mover and a seconder for the approval of tonight's agenda. Councillor Greer, seconded by Councillor Oates. Are there any errors or omissions or deletions? Or seeing none, all those in favor? Carried. Thank you very much. We have one presentation tonight. That's our Chief of Police, Staff Sergeant Brian Hunter, for the mid-year statistics up to June 30th on incidents in the City of Parksville. You have the microphone, sir.
Thank you, Mayor, Councillors, for having me here this evening to update you folks on the crime statistics for the City of Parksville up to the end of June of this year. I'll run through the numbers. Some of them I'm going to talk about, and then afterwards I'm going to discuss a little bit the Crime Severity Index. Stats Canada just released some numbers there. I'll talk about that and just a few things in general. So, as previous reports that I've provided, and I think this is the 14th time I've appeared before Council. I'll have been here for 7 years next month. Time really does fly. The numbers that I'm presenting are the number of reported events at the detachment, and I'm going to compare the numbers for 2014 to 2015. First is assaults, and this year what I've done is I've actually separated the number of spousal assaults. So the number you have before you in brackets is the number of assaults that were spousal related in a relationship, either the male or the female was a victim. So for assaults in 2014 there were 36, 8 of which were domestic spousal assaults. 2015 there were 37, 14 of which were spousal assaults. Business break and enters remain the same at 18. Residential break and enters went from 17 down to 8. Theft of motor vehicle from 10 to 11. And my pet peeve of a crime, which I believe I've spoken to at every council meeting and how frustrating it is, went from 35 up to 100 for this reporting period. I want to talk about that a little bit. Theft from vehicles is one of those crimes that is 100% preventable. If there's nothing in your vehicle, they can't steal it. And it's a crime of opportunity, and it's a crime that can take place in a matter of seconds, and they can do dozens of them in one evening. I can tell you there was a spike of activity. It started mid-April into mid-May. For example, our first quarter this year, 2014, there were 14 reported events. 2015, there were 14 reported events. This all happened in the last quarter. On May 19th, we made an arrest of an adult male, and we interrogated this male. As you can appreciate, theft from vehicles are very challenging events to investigate. If the person's wearing gloves, they're in and out. There is virtually no physical evidence. Our crime reduction team set up a project, and we did arrest a male. And when we interrogated him, he, although we only had the evidence for one, he admitted when we asked him to do an over 50, 60. He says, "I can't remember. I was high on drugs and I was feeding my drug habit." He did make it very, very clear that he didn't smash any windows. He didn't want to, quote unquote, victimize people in that way. He just checked for door handles. If it was open, he went in and got things of value so he could feed his drug habit. He was sentenced to 60 days in jail. On June 7th, we arrested a adult female for theft from vehicle. It happens to be an associate of the first arrest. She was released on conditions, and on June 17th, we arrested her again in possession of stolen property from some other theft from vehicles that occurred. She was placed on conditions, and she breached those conditions and was once again arrested for that, and she's currently in custody. On June 28th, we also arrested an adult female for possession of stolen property related to theft from vehicles. All these folks are associated to each other, and they are local here in the community, because I can tell you the town of Qualicum Beach had no spike. They have virtually none. So this is a spike of activity that happened within our community. There's certainly, drug is the root of a lot of crimes, property crimes. We know that, and this is a classic example of that. We need to lock our vehicles and stop leaving valuables in them. It's just that clear. Let's not present the nice canvas for them to do their crime artwork on, is basically what it comes down to. Thefts went from 61 to 86, and you can bet these folks, if they're walking along and they see something in a yard, they're going to take it as well. So there is a correlation there. I added a category that hasn't previously been reported on, and the reason I did that is we've had a large spike in shoplifting files. In 2014, there were 22, and in 2015, there were 59. This spike is very easily explained, and what it comes down to is a retailer in the city of Parksville was tired of shoplifting. They hired an individual, a private firm, to have security within their premises, specifically targeting shoplifters, and that spike is 100% attributed to that retailer in this community that is doing something about their shoplifting. Shoplifting is actually a large issue for retailers. There's various estimates of numbers out there. Some of them are as much as a grocery store the size of the ones in our community lose $60,000, $70,000 a year in shoplifting, and theft. Sometimes there's internal theft, but that's just a classic example how your numbers can spike, but there's a reason for it. Is they've taken action on that, and that spike is 100% because of that.
Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Your Worship. Is that the shoplifting, is it with food or electronics, or can you just clothing?
This is in a retailer that sells food and vitamins and that sort of stuff, high-priced items that are easily put into a purse or in a bag and that sort of stuff. Mischief to business and other properties from 50 to 57. Residential mischief from 23 down to 21. Cause of disturbance from 41 to 48. Drugs, and this is the myriad of all the drug offenses, be it possession of drugs, production, trafficking, those types of offenses, from 26 to 31. Impaired driving, criminal code went from 5, and we did not have any in this reporting period. The IRP 90-day fail, that's the immediate roadside prohibition, where they fail a roadside screening device and their vehicle is impounded for 30 days. They lose their license for 90. From 21 to 10, if they refuse to provide that roadside breath sample, it's a refusal, same penalty, just a lot less paperwork for us. From 3 to 3, it remained the same. Liquor Act offenses, minor consuming liquor, liquor in public, possession of liquor in a motor vehicle type of thing, 38 to 25. Motor vehicle collisions from 59 to 66. And traffic offenses within the city of Parksville, and those range from speeding to distracted driving, stop signs, red lights, unsafe passing, that type of thing, from 755 to 761. And criminal code traffic, that's the serious stuff, leaves the scene of an accident, dangerous driving, those types of thing, from 4 down to 3. I mentioned at the beginning that I was going to report on the crime severity index, and that Stats Canada puts out for communities across the country, and it's different than a crime rate. As we all know, and I've heard me speak before, a crime rate is the number of reported crimes per population per 1,000 in a community. The crime severity index, it's actually a weighted system to measure crime in a community. For example, we have 100 theft from vehicles. Should that carry the same weight of aggravated assault in the realm of your crime severity index in your community? And no, it shouldn't. So they weigh out the crimes in a community. What's the average sentencing for certain crimes and that sort of stuff. So there's 165 policing jurisdictions in the RCMP in the province of BC, and I will mention all three of my policing jurisdictions, the town of Qualicum Beach, city of Parksville, and Oceanside Rural. The third lowest crime severity index in the province belongs to Qualicum Beach. They are the third lowest. Oceanside Rural area is the 18th lowest, and the city of Parksville is 61. And you might look at the 61 compared to the other two and go, oh my, 61 is still very low. There's 104 other communities that are much higher. You know, we have more industry and more action and more activity in this community than the town of Qualicum Beach. I think, I don't know if you folks have noticed, but we've certainly heard it at the detachment. There's quite a bit more traffic in town in the city of Parksville this year versus last year. And I don't think we should be upset by that. We should be happy with that. We have lots of people coming to our community. Certainly there's some traffic issues that come with that, and we're aware of that, and we conduct enforcement accordingly. But yeah, there's lots of people come to your community, which makes a huge economy here. And with that, some of the crime numbers go up, but it is not a drastic number in the relative picture to other communities in the province. So I just thought I would mention those three communities to you.
Thank you very much. Just before I go around the table and ask council for members of council who have questions, I can't help, every time you talk about the theft from motor vehicles, you've been saying now for a long, long time on reporting on the statistics that this is entirely preventable. And I'm in the habit now is when I get out of my car, whether it's at Shoppers Drug Mart or wherever in town to do some shopping, I tend to look at the car next on my left and on my right, and invariably, both cars are unlocked. Now, I come from a big city. I would never leave my car unlocked. It's a habit I can't break. But I'm simply amazed at the cars that are left unlocked. And I think I told you on one occasion, I was in front of the drugstore, parked in the Sharples Drug Mart parking lot. The doors were unlocked, and there were packages all over the place, in the front seat and in the back seat. And the doors were unlocked. So I don't know. I guess it's when people report that they've had things stolen. Hopefully that won't happen again. They'll get the message to lock their doors.
I hope so. I certainly reported it to the paper, and I want to get it out there for people to do their part in preventing crimes in our community, and there is a lot that we can do for sure.
Members of council, questions? Councillor Greer, questions for the staff sergeant.
Thank you, Your Worship. Most of the theft, I'm sure, of motor vehicles and of articles out of vehicles is caused by people on drugs as well. Where is this going to end? Is there they need to have more teeth in the law to put these people away further? Should there be some way of helping them out? Because it seems to grow on a continual basis.
Yeah, it can be very frustrating, and rest assured, when we have these folks in custody and we're speaking with them, we're asking if they need help as well. We know they need help. Would you like some help? Because there is help for those who want it. But clearly there is a revolving door. And I can tell you, I don't want to draw any conclusions here, but the individual that was arrested and received 60 days in jail, and I pointed out it was mid-May, 60 days later, mid-July, we had a significant spike in theft from vehicles. This individual, I'm advised, has moved to another community, not on the island, but it's still an individual out there that needs some help. And yeah, it is frustrating. We work with probation and Crown Council and everyone out there to see if we can get these people are in their early 20s, and it's certainly they're on a road that's not very good, and we'd love to get them off the road, both for their own benefit and the benefit of the community, and we do try. We do.
Just the last week of July, my neighbor, who lives in Doug's old house beside me, he had 2 brand new kayaks, on the top of his vehicle, and they were well strapped down, and I don't know whether he had them locked or not. But after a couple of nights, and I never really paid much attention to them, but after a couple of nights, one went missing in the middle of the night. So I'm assuming it would be somebody that needs to sell it for drugs and so on. Did you ever come across a kayak?
Not that I know of.
Thanks.
Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would just like to clarify, and this is just a statement, it's not a question. I know that in this community we used to have one drug and alcohol counselor. We're down to an on-call drug and alcohol counselor. So this community is severely lacking in services in that area. What Island Health is doing is mental health. They have clinicians for mental health, but they're down, this person's on call. So there isn't a lot of services for adult people with addictions to access in this community, and I don't think a lot of people are aware of that.
Yeah, it goes without saying, you know what, in a perfect world, which we don't live in, and I don't have the illusion that we're even close to it, but we would have unlimited money and resources, and none of this would happen because everyone would get the help immediately. And I got to tell you, people that have addictions like this and are doing these things, that's a mental health issue. And they need help. They really, really do. And I hear you, and it gets frustrating.
Further questions, Councillor Oates, then Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Brian, for the presentation. I want to focus in on the theft from the motor vehicles, theft over and under $5,000 from the motor vehicles and the over and under. Is there any other patterns? Are there any patterns? Is it a particular part of town that it was happening? Is it something that was happening at our shopping malls? Is it a downtown problem, or is it just random?
Great question, Councillor Oates. And they picked a different quadrant of our community, and it wasn't every night. They would take a couple nights off, probably reaping the rewards of their thefts. And it was all over the community. It was residential areas, and they would just walk down the street and check door handles. That's it. If it was open, they go inside and take anything of value. That's all they did. And it was throughout the community. There wasn't an area that was immune to it.
Are you aware of any instances where people left their homes unlocked and there was thefts from the homes, or is this just isolated to thefts from vehicles and RVs and such that's parked in the driveway type thing?
This is basically isolated to the theft from vehicles. Our residential break-and enters for a 6-month period is 8, which is very, very, very low. And some of those are would be an example could be an angry tenant came back and took something. So some of them are they're known to each other type of thing. So the problem is definitely the crime of opportunity, not having to break a window. It's just kind of sitting there. I might as well take it type of event.
Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Worship. Thank you, Staff Sergeant Hunter, for coming for your 14th time. Your stats aren't unrealistic or surprising or anything to me. The only question I have is that there isn't really a category or any comments from you on youth. Could you give me any indication on, are we seeing any high or lower aspects of youth mischief or things like that?
Certainly. I can tell you that very few youth get engaged in crime in the city of Parksville. We have a youth probation officer, and at one point in time he had 2 clients, and he's like, hey, I need clients, I'm going to lose my job here type of thing. He wasn't saying that, I'm being facetious. But in my 7 years here, youth have not been a problem. Do they get a bit goofy sometimes and do some silly things? Absolutely. And for the most part, they're very respectful kids that are well behaved. Do we have the odd one? Absolutely. But not an issue in this community at all.
Sure, go ahead.
Thank you. And then my other question was, are you seeing an increase in our transient type population that you may or may not be aware of any incidents resulting from?
We've definitely had an increase in calls for service related to homeless individuals that are camping out in areas, and myself, having been here for 7 years, just visually, I see a few more folks in the community. Generally speaking, they haven't been a problem. They can be a nuisance at times, depending where they are and that sort of stuff. We have responded, and our biggest thing throughout this, to be candid with you, was a fire hazard. We don't want folks in our areas here keeping warm and lighting fires, and that was our big concern, and Chief Banks and I have discussed that as well. It's not an overt problem, but I tell you, if over the years you have one or two and now there's 4 or 5, it's a little bit more than average, but certainly not inundated.
Well, thank you very much again for coming and giving us this presentation, and of course providing some insights in some of the challenges that you have. I wanted to just touch very briefly in my closing comments something on the topic that Councillor Powell brought up in terms of what might be lacking, but I didn't hear you say that there was anything lacking in terms of being able to deal with this. It just is what it is. There's a level of crime out there that has to be managed and dealt with as it comes, and it peaks and the valleys. I'm wondering if we're going to see, given the high increase in tourists that we're seeing this year, which is a blessing for our economy, and the weather makes it even more popular. I'm wondering if we're going to see a bit of a spike in the next report with regards to what might be happening or might not be happening now.
I can tell you, generally speaking, tourists don't cause us any problems crime-wise. We get a few calls for service of non-crime-related events, but generally speaking, they're fantastic, and they don't spike the numbers necessarily. I certainly haven't seen that. And I got to reinforce here, the crime rate in this community is not out of control. It's a very, very safe community. And those who are curious, number 1 and 2 ahead of Qualicum Beach, the lowest crime severity index is Bowen Island, and the second lowest is the municipality of Comox, BC. And for those who are curious, the worst is Williams Lake, BC.
On that note, thanks very much. We appreciate all that you and your staff do. Be safe out there. Okay, thank you. And the next presenter we have is Mr. John Olsen of the Oceanside Coalition of Strong Communities. And we're glad to see you back, Mr. Olsen. Yeah, that's a very short one. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Your Worship. First thing I want to say is that, well, first of all, what we're dealing with tonight is what to us was a stunning and radical demolition of the building under construction on Jensen Avenue, and it led to a lot of contact within the community and a lot of outrage. The other thing I want to say is we have no complaints whatsoever of any kind with staff in the way they handled our inquiries about the event. They seem to have, they reported, followed due process. So we will be addressing a suggestion tonight that the council might want to consider dealing with demolition permits in a more sensitive way. The point that needs to be made, from my perspective anyway, as one who is engaged in certain aspects of community planning, is we live in a built environment, and that basically means we try to build the communities that we live in to meet the needs of those who make the decisions about that kind of construction. I just want to, I think on behalf of the coalition, make it clear that demolition is as impactful on the quality of the community life as construction is, and therefore we feel it should be addressed. We have dealt with the property owner who acquired that property. We've made our views known to them. We have had no response from them. but we're not here to complain about that either. We'll deal with them when they become a citizen of our community. In particular, we would like to ask Council to consider refining the bylaws so that matters can be dealt with, and we're prepared to submit a few principles that we think should be followed. But I just want to give a couple of examples of the kind of reaction we got when people talked about that event. One of the examples was, why in the hell didn't they give it to Habitat for Humanity? There we had a series of buildings all connected, close to lock-up stage, with a great deal of high-quality building materials located in the building that were randomly and rapidly destroyed. Ironically, I personally and others of my group were engaged in a training session right next door in the conference center. And we stepped out at the end of our day of work, dealing with another matter altogether. We stepped outside of the building, and the structure that had been there was gone, and in its place sat a big fat orange excavator. And friends who had witnessed the event told me afterwards they basically punched it down till it disappeared. Again, that's not something that we blame in any way whatsoever the city for having done, and we will deal with the owner in due course in whatever way we feel might be helpful. But the other suggestion about that might have been undertaken with that material, was one I'm particularly fond of, was the proposal that the owner of the property ought to have, and the city might have encouraged them to put out a contract to have the building demolished as buildings used to be demolished piece by piece. In fact, we have a business just located down the highway, Alberni Highway, known as Demex, that deals almost entirely in those kinds of materials. I had a vision and had intended to execute it, assuming that I had more time, of possibly going to the high school and seeing if we could recruit student workers and form a co-op or a company or something to create their own summer employment. The community is full, literally full, of people who can help in that regard. I myself have credentials as a small business startup counselor. I've done training, actually, for a couple of people in this room in the past, and could have helped to bring together the kind of entity that would have been able to do that. I know teachers in the high school who would have been happy to have helped get the student body together. We would have needed not too much time, and we were, in fact, just about out of the school year, as it were. But we could have done that and created employment for, I would think, something in the order of a dozen of our high school students as a demolition crew. And there are all kinds of retired building engineers and building supervisors and contractors who could have helped in such a cooperative venture. So we're asking that the council give consideration to amending or drafting as necessary appropriate bylaws, and we offer a handful of principles that we think should be addressed. First of all, there should be on-site local public notification of the intent to demolish. There should be some kind of, as one would do with a development permit, for example, a notice. It doesn't have to be particularly expensive, and the local neighbors would have the opportunity to respond if they felt they needed to do so. Secondly, there should be a public notice of the response of the permit applicant. In other words, if somebody contests their decision to demolish, that they should give reasons why they're doing what they're doing, and that those reasons should be as public as the original notice. A difficult one to deal with, but one that I'm particularly attracted to, is I would hope there would be some way and I would defer to the administration of the city in this regard, some sort of penalty or reward attached to conditions that might be issued or surrounding a demolition permit. We think it could be tied to the value of the asset being demolished. We all know there are plenty of buildings that are overdue for demolition, and we'd be happy to see them gone in some cases, but the fact of the matter is those wouldn't be contentious by their nature, certainly not as contentious as this particular one. We think also that the bylaw should have appropriate exemption criteria. There are circumstances in which the logic of demolition is straightforward, and as the building inspector put it to me, if they want to demolish it, we basically give them a permit to do so. That's assumed to be the property owner's option, and the logic behind that is most of the time going to be valid, but in this case it was not. And we assume there are other criteria that might be dictated by law, statute in the province of British Columbia that the city would be obliged to conform to. Those are the principles we would put forth, and I would be prepared to hand the notes on this presentation to anybody that wants to follow it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John, and very thoughtful and very considerate as usual. It's interesting, the whole issue of ownership brings with it certain rights and authorities, and I couldn't help but think when I saw the machine destroying the building, I immediately went to staff and asked some questions, and one of the things that oddly enough I was told was that the cost to dismantle the building for the supplies would have been extremely expensive, prohibitively expensive apparently, because of the way of construction happens today, and the value of what would have been left behind wouldn't have been worth very much. But that having been said, I can't help but wonder, before they put the wrecking ball into those 3 townhomes, I can't help but wonder if somebody had gone to the owner of the property and said, "Will you give us the building?" They probably would have said yes, because they were going to tear it down. So it's something that we'll have to look at. I know that this has never happened before in my experience. I know we've demolished buildings that were either had asbestos and things like that required some hazmat work, and it was very, very tricky. There's going to be a demolition of the old Cabernet restaurant and the attached motel, but I'm told there's asbestos in there, and that's going to have to be done very carefully. And there's vermin, and that's going to have to be done very carefully. But there will definitely be a demolition there in order to reconstruct when the time comes. But I can only say that, it was an unfortunate incident, but, under the present circumstances, what the owner did was perfectly legal and perfectly allowable under the existing laws. I don't know if any member of staff could comment. What would prohibit us if there was a building? I guess we'd have to know what their intentions are. So the owner would have to say, "I plan on doing this," and then we could publicize that fact. Mr. Russell, can you help me out here?
Your Worship, if I may, and I haven't researched this topic extensively, so I can't comment with full legislative knowledge, but I honestly don't believe that in the case of demolition, bylaws are a very blunt instrument. They either allow for something or they don't. So by their very nature, they don't have a discretionary manner about them. You're either allowed to apply for a demolition permit or you're not. There's a number of legitimate reasons why someone may apply to demolish a building. Maybe it's dilapidated. Maybe the site's being redeveloped. In my experience, I've been in municipal government, local government for 12 years. I've never seen a new building demolished. It's usually not the most cost-effective business decision for someone to make, so I don't think there's a trend of it But as far as prohibiting it, we're not subjective when we issue building permits either. If they meet the BC building code, the city has to issue building permits. It has no choice in the matter. That's assuming that everything else is okay. As far as the building permit goes, it's the same thing. So I'm not aware of a legislative tool that would allow us to prohibit demolition. The only thing is typically where something's being declared a heritage property, there's some specific provisions in legislation for heritage properties, but that would not be the case here.
Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Worship. Thank you very much for your presentation. I agree with you that was a big waste, and one of my questions was to the Director of Planning about our authority as far as bylaws and everything. And as you were talking, I think it's an opportunity for our community. We could have different, like you talked about, working with the schools, but I think mainly the work needs to be done with the developers in the community, the Oceanside Construction Association, in line with and in joint partnership with the city. So when there's going to be a demolition permit issued, that there's already a plan to speak, that the developers know that this other thing exists. And I think that's the work that needs to be done in order to get this to happen, because I agree with you, it was a big waste. I had an issue with it as well. But if we worked with the developers, or the Oceanside Coalition did, and worked with the developers to start to recognize and identify things where we can get value out of something that's going to be destroyed, I think that would be a better way to approach it, because by the sounds of it from the Director of Planning, we don't have any authority. You either can or you can't. And so I don't know if that's the way to go.
Any further comments or questions from members of council? Well, John, I think you've given us food for thought. I'm thinking that when we're looking at projects, especially that involve demolition, I'm sure it's going to trigger some red lights that are going to go on and some bells that are going to go. And this one was very, very unfortunate. I couldn't agree more. This is, I'm sure, although I didn't verify it, but I'm sure that the owners of that property, if they were going to do what they did, if somebody had said, look, we'll take it off your hands, we'll pay for the transportation, we'll find a place for it, I'm almost positive they would have said, go for it. But that we didn't have that kind of mechanism to allow that to happen, and maybe that's what's got to happen. Yes, Councillor Powell.
And just to follow up, if that mechanism was in place, we probably would have been able to do something different. And if that mechanism would have been in place, we might have been able to do something different. But at this point, there's nothing in the community that exists for developers when they're going to, what did you call it, demolish something. Is there another alternative? We need to create that alternative, and I think that's a really good idea, personally.
If I may, in a closing comment, point out that early on in the principles we set forth was the notification of intent, and that in itself should be enough to mobilize the community. Notwithstanding Mr. Russell's comments, I don't think that in any way implies a prohibition. It simply puts in a time delay factor, allowing the community to respond. As an editorial note, I did submit a letter to the editor of the local paper addressing this matter, and he offered the opinion that it wasn't appropriate to publish it because he'd already published a letter from me earlier on the same subject. So I didn't get a forum in whatever media we had available to us.
Councillor Oates.
Well, it seems like it might be a difficult thing for us to put in some sort of bylaws or something. I'm not certain whether it's appropriate even to do it, but I do believe that it is appropriate for developers, and maybe it's because they're a new dog in town, they haven't been here before, but it's appropriate for people to know that those are not the type of values that are supported by the people of Parksville. We're not a wasteful society, and what looked to us like an obvious waste of construction materials is something that just doesn't fly in this community. So I applaud you for bringing it forward to council. You've done your part to put it on the radar. I think that developers should know that if you're going to come into our town, that we want things done a certain way, and while there might have been a valid business case for what was done with that particular property, it just didn't pass the smell test for the people in the community, and they saw it as a waste. So I applaud you, John, for bringing this forward, and it's people like you that provide a conscience for this town.
John, will you leave us a copy of, you've got written down what you gave us? Could you, okay, would you leave it with staff? Leave it with Amanda, please? You mind? Thank you. Thanks very much. Councillor Powell.
Don't roll your eyes, Your Worship. So I would like to recommend that Councillor Greer, who's our representative on the Oceanside Construction Association, please bring that to them for their opinion and input.
Good point. All right, we have the next presenter, which is Dr. Stuart, Dr. Carl Stuart of Vancouver Island University. I've got your title right, your department head of the Health Sciences Department? Health and Human Services, I apologize. And Dr. Stewart's going to talk to us about the community health promotion in Aboriginal community program that we have for VIU, which is very exciting because it's going to take place right in this building in the Parksville campus. So Dr. Stuart, thank you very much for coming all the way from Nanaimo at supper time. We appreciate it. And I told you earlier, you don't feel bad about leaving after your presentation if you want to go home and have supper.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. Can everybody hear me? Mics work a little bit different here. Thank you very much for the invitation to come and give a little bit of an update on Parksville Qualicum Centre, and particularly the Community Health Promotion in Aboriginal Communities certificate. A couple of people, Your Worship and Councillor Greer, were at a community consultation we held on the Centre for Healthy Aging after the last time that I was here at the meeting. And we are moving along in terms of creating some programming and beginning to build that programming within the centre, and you'll perhaps have me back again to do another update on some additional programming as we go along. This particular program is a certificate program, and as you might be aware, our Nanaimo campus is very, very full. We're cramming people into corners and trying to figure out how to timetable. This program, for that reason and for another reason, we decided to implement at the Parksville Centre. So this is a program that we developed in collaboration with Intertribal Health Authority. And we've been working on the program actually for about 4 or 5 years, and most intensely over the last year to create and get passed through our Senate the certificate. So we have brought in the last couple of years, the First Nations Health Authority as well. So the program is targeted at people in community who are working with the First Nations Health and Wellness Plan and with the Intertribal Health Authority and their health and wellness approach for Aboriginal communities. And it's not just about people that are working, but certainly we're interested in people in community that are working and people that are interested in working in this field. And so the graduates of this program will be able to assist people in the First Nations communities, primarily on the island, with health assessments, with understanding the resources that are available to them to improve their health, and for helping them to plan and engage in particular in wellness types of activities, because that's very much the kind of orientation, is a health promotion, a wellness orientation for the First Nations communities that are developing their own services. Because we're interested in bringing people to the program who are living in community, often remote communities, it's designed to be delivered as a blended format. So people will come in once every 6 weeks on the weekend, And they'll be here Friday night, Saturday, and Sunday. They'll be in class for that period of time, and then they'll go away and they'll continue their studies online. They'll come back again 6 weeks later, finish off that course, and start another course on the Saturday and Sunday, go away again, and so on. So the program will go on from, scheduled from September until May, at which point they will go into community in a practicum. And then hopefully we'll start out all over again in September 2016. So I wanted to invite questions if anyone's interested, and if you know of anyone who might be interested in the program, I have some applications as well, so I could leave those with you.
Thanks very much. Councillor Oates, you have some questions, and Councillor Patterson.
Is this program currently offered at another VIU campus?
No, this is a new program.
How many participants do you anticipate?
We'd be ecstatic if we had 25. Okay. How's that?
Can I continue on? You said that the VIU campus in Nanaimo is at capacity, and we have room here. So how much room do we have here at our campus here?
Parksville Qualicum Center has 5 classrooms, 2 basic classrooms, a computer lab, and then the aesthetics program occupies 2 classrooms, which include a classroom lab type space and a client services space. So 5 classrooms.
And one final question. Do we have the ability to house people here, the students here, if we have students?
No, students will need to find their own accommodation, and I would imagine that they'll be looking for student rates. That's, I think, probably the best way to put it. So certainly if you're aware of that kind of potential, our coordinator for this program would appreciate knowing.
Councillor Patterson.
Thank you. Councillor Oates asked 1 or 2 of my questions to a degree, but you've received a funding for this program. It's a one-time, but is it based on a 25-person capacity classroom, or?
Okay, good question. So the Ministry of Advanced Education offers one-time only funding on an annual basis. So you have to apply for the funding and you have to do that annually. It's not guaranteed. For programs that are under 1 year in length, so this program qualifies for that. What that allows us to do is to subsidize the tuition. So we've set the tuition. I think the tuition is listed in the on the back of the brochure. They have provided us with funding for, as they describe it, 12 seats, right? So that allows us to reduce the tuition. So 12 is our minimum to run, and 25 would be our maximum. So, and all students will pay the same tuition. So they don't sponsor by seat, they sponsor the program, and if we get more than 12, then we have that extra amount of money to be able to run the program. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. Follow-up. What do you foresee the student being able to do once it's completed this program? What type of work in the community? So
First Nations communities, virtually all of them, and this is actually would be across Canada, have a position called a community health representative, which is basically a liaison type of position. They help people with health issues or with wellness issues to understand the services and resources that are available to them. The original mandate in terms of developing this program was targeted at those particular positions. There's usually 1 or 2 people in any given First Nations community, which is why we can't go into community to deliver the program. We need them to come to a centralized location. And the First Nations Health Authority, if you go onto their website, you'll see in the description of their health and wellness plan that they're envisioning people who do health promotion, health coaching, those kinds of positions, who may be people that are perhaps already a registered nurse but don't necessarily have a wellness type of focus. And so this program could be taken by someone who has an existing diploma or degree, who needs to develop their own understanding of health promotion, develop their leadership skills, their communication skills, and really develop a very clear understanding of First Nations health issues. So there'll be a strong component of the program that will focus on colonialism, on the effects of colonialism on health broadly, on the disassociation from the land, for example, and how those pieces of determinants of health are important within Indigenous populations.
Do you foresee them only working in First Nation community specific, or?
The program is targeted very clearly for working in Aboriginal communities. That said, there's a very large urban Aboriginal population, and so working in friendship centers would be another option for people.
Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you for your presentation. So I'm sort of confused because the qualifications, it looked to me like it was an entry-level positions that they were trying to fill, and yet when you spoke about it, you said it was for an RN who wanted to do different types. Could you explain that more, please?
The requirements for admission are entry level. So this is out of grade 12. It's basically a first-year university type of program. We're anticipating that people will have academic transfer credit as a result of taking this program. That said, this is a very unique set of content. There's one other program in Canada, and they are also starting this fall, and that's out of University of Lethbridge in Alberta. So very often when you have, even though it's an entry-level certificate, people who are working in communities or who are interested in working in communities can also benefit from the knowledge, and the program delivery is designed so that it would be very easy for them to do that.
And so if they were to take this program at the entry level, would the credits be transferable into other programs and degrees?
Yes, it's an academic-based program, 3 credits for each course, and so obviously that's up to the receiving institution, but we certainly envision that it's a first step for students towards a degree program, definitely at VIU.
So at VIU they would be transferable?
Yes.
Well, first of all, I think it's a great program, and I wasn't fully aware of the Intertribal Health Authority and their role, and this has brought it to our attention, and we're delighted to help in any way we can. It's the Parksville campus, and we're always excited about the work that VIU does here on campus. We think it's very, very important to our community. I know that when I've told you this before, when we go to municipal conferences and we tell people that we have a university campus in our small city, it's very exciting. A lot of people turn green with envy that we have that, and I think that this physical presence in our community of this particular type of program bodes well for greater interaction that we want to achieve with the First Nations. The specific question I have with the Oceanside Health Centre in terms of the overall issues of health, would there be, or is there intended to be at some point in time, some kind of interaction? I know that I'll be meeting with some of the folk from the Oceanside Health Centre in terms of how we progress and how things are going there. And if they don't know about this, I'd like to bring this to their attention, or would you like to be there with me and bring it to their attention?
Happy to have you bring it to their attention, Mark, and I'm also quite happy to come and talk with them about it if they would like to do that. I think your question had a little bit of a broader base, which is as we go forward in developing our programming at Parksville Qualicum Centre, is there potential for partnerships with the Oceanside Health Centre? Is that Yeah. So I'm going to answer that question a little more broadly because I am constantly in discussion with Island Health about the kinds of opportunities that they have for us to be delivering programming with them. And so that's an ongoing process, trying to tease out what they need and what we can deliver for them. Is there opportunity for some of that to be delivered here in Parksville, Qualicum? Absolutely. And similarly, partnerships with the various residential care centers and the various other types of health services that are in the area. The key is determining the critical mass for students and how to draw the students in and give them what the Island Health Authority needs in terms of training. Some of that will happen through our professional development and training arm. And we already do some of that, our medical office assistant, for example, those kinds of programs we do here already. And some of it is things that we continue to try to work with them to develop. But we're really in a position of needing to meet their needs and trying to identify what those are.
Well, thank you very much once again, and we really appreciate you taking this time. You're not that far from home, but you're not home, and as I said earlier, you don't have to stay. It's not obligatory that you have to stay for the rest of the meeting. Thanks again.
It's my pleasure. I'm happy to come and give council updates, and I appreciated the invitation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very, very much appreciated. Well, our next speaker, our next delegation speaker is no stranger to this particular forum. Chris Berger, Your Worship Chris Berger, is going to talk to us about the Mount Arrowsmith Biosphere Region, and we've got a memorandum of understanding, which I hope Council will give attention to this evening with regards to re-signing for the Memorandum of Understanding and working with this all-important organization. Mr. Berger, over to you.
Thank you, Your Worship, members of Council, members of staff. It's a pleasure to be here. Before I begin, let me just say thank you for your ongoing good governance of our community. It's obviously important for someone who was in this office not so long ago. I am here, of course, as your liaison that you have appointed me to be with ourselves and, of course, VIU in the context of the Mount Arrowsmith Biosphere Region. I will keep my discussion very brief, Councillor Greer. I just want to give a little bit of a background very quickly and just quite frankly say that if it wasn't for the city stepping up and if it wasn't for the university stepping up when we did, I doubt very much we would still have a biosphere here. But I can tell you that we are no longer on the D list, so that is a very positive thing. It means that now the attention focuses on the future and the things that we can achieve together. And I can tell you as your liaison, because I'm not actually a member of the Mount Arrowsmith Biosphere Region, and I'm not a member of VIU, but I can tell you from my discussions with those individuals that they very much appreciate and want to build the relationship that they have with the city. And to that extent, I'll draw your attention to our Memorandum of Understanding. Now, as you know, the city in its last term of office did engage into this Memorandum of Understanding and did achieve what I was just talking to. And it is now time to consider renewing it. I think the memorandum itself is not changed all that much. I think there's been some almost housekeeping changes to make this process a little bit easier, because you'll note in there that either party with 30 days notice could leave this agreement, although I can't see a reason why we would want to do that. Nonetheless, it is there before you, and the hope is that you will authorize your mayor to sign this document, and there is a party plan, the celebration, if you will, on the 19th, because of the fact that we now have a solid biosphere that we can build together. And of course, I believe, Your Worship, you've already had an invitation extended to you to attend that. So with that, I'll leave it to you, sir.
Any questions for Mr. Berger? Councillor Powell?
I'll move the recommendation.
You move the recommendation. Do I have a seconder for the recommendation? Councillor Patterson. Discussion on the recommendation or questions for Mr. Berger? Councillor Oates.
You realized you did have 5 minutes.
I understand, but I also know I'm the third delegation, and having sat in that chair many times, I know how you would probably want to get on with the meeting. I think this is fairly straightforward.
Okay, so having not sat in this chair for very long, I'd like a little bit of history there. So how long has this memorandum been in existence?
It was about 3 years, I believe. It was in the last term of office that we signed it when it became apparent that the biosphere was floundering. So to give you that little bit of history, we had a real struggle here with the biosphere on and off for many years. It was something that I think was put in place very well intentioned. It is one of only 2 in the entire province, only less than 2 dozen in all of Canada, about 600 worldwide. So it represents a international region within our province, and it is part of a network primarily run by universities. It's research-based. It's under the UNESCO program. It's all about sharing science and cultural information with each other. And it's very exciting because I know they just had an AGM recently, and Parksville was part of the presenters there. So we're getting a lot of great accolades and attention at an international level. Unfortunately, things turned a little bit sideways. It became more of an environmental activist group, and that created all kinds of strife and struggle on the board, and it eventually collapsed. It was, of course, the city and the university stepping up to essentially bring it back to where it should be, and it has been in very good stead since.
I think that Mr. Berger is being somewhat modest because when things were going not so well, you jumped in with both feet and grabbed everybody by the bootstraps and kept the thing going. And I think it's a credit to the Vancouver Island University. They were very, very cooperative.
Absolutely.
You yourself did yeoman's work on that, was able to convince council to sign the MOU. Any further questions or comments from members of council? Seeing none, I'm going to call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you. That is carried, and thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much.
And on the 19th, I may or may not be able to go, and if I can't, I'll ask some member of council to go in my stead. It's just a short get-together and more of a ceremonial thing.
More ceremonial, but you definitely have to put your name on that document.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Okay, we have one piece of correspondence tonight. It's from the Central Vancouver Island Multicultural Society, and it's a letter of support for a local immigration partnership. For councils, you want to make the motion that, do you want to move? You want to be the mover? Seconder, Councillor Powell. Just before I call the vote on this particular issue, this has got to do with, obviously multiculturalism and the whole issue of welcoming new immigrants into our community. And you'll be getting an email from me in the next 24 to 48 hours. There's another event that we want to hold along with the Central Vancouver Island Multicultural Society in terms of some training, which I think, or training and information, which I think will be valuable. So on that note, if there's no questions, I'm going to call a vote. All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you. Okay. We are now into reports. Mr. Russell, the first one we have tonight requiring background on the issue regarding consideration of an exemption to the minimum 10% frontage requirement applicable to a subdivision 452 and 440 Island Highway East. Mr. Russell.
If I may, Your Worship, I'll be brief. In a sense, this is almost a math problem, in the sense that the actual frontage of these two properties on the highway is remaining unchanged, with one property with a 10.7 meter length and another one with a 21.5 meter length. However, as a result of an internal proposed lot line shift that's part of a separate subdivision application, the actual percentages along that roadway shift somewhat, slightly, from 2.38% to 2.18% in the case of Lot 2, and in the case of Lot 1, they actually increased from 7.01% to 7.97%. So in a sense, we have a non-conforming situation remaining a non-conforming situation with a very slight adjustment for council consideration of a waiver.
Thank you for that very exact presentation. Do I have a mover and a seconder? Moved by Councillor Greer, seconded by Councillor Powell. Any further comments or questions? Seeing none, I'm going to call the vote. All those in favor? Thank you. Okay, the next report is from Mr. Butterworth with regard to refund of property tax penalties. Mr. Butterworth, you sent us a fairly comprehensive report. I guess I'll ask you to, if you feel it's worthwhile. Does council feel it's worthwhile that Mr. Butterworth give us a Coles Notes version, or can I ask for a mover and a seconder simply for the to be received? Moved by Councillor Oates, seconded by Councillor Powell. Comments, questions? All those in favor? Okay. Yes, Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Worship. I would also like to make a recommendation that we, through the City of Parksville and the Grant and Aid program, pay the taxes that Mr. I forget what his name was. Sorry, Bitten was charged. That we do a grant and aid and repay that money back to him.
Second. Seconded by Councillor Oates. Comments or suggestions? Councillor Greer and then Councillor.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would certainly support the motion. However, I would also like to say that from this point on, I think letters of this type should not come to council. I think the Finance Department should handle it, and we should stay with our bylaws.
Councillor Patterson. Okay. Are you going to rebut?
So I agree with you, Councillor Greer, and this one did make it to council, and one of the reasons I didn't support that the last meeting was because it came directly to council, and so I support that. And this is a veteran at the last stage of his life, and I think this is fair enough for us to do a grant and aid. Thank you.
Councillor.
Yeah. Well, just one thing. I agree totally, and that's why I would support it, because he is an older chap, very sick, and he's a veteran. But I also agree with our finance, Lucky Butterworth, that, and I know he was a little bit perturbed that we keep giving back refunds and everything, but I do think from this point on, the Finance Department should handle it, and there should be no more question about refunding money. Thank you.
I'm going to let Ms. Comas go for. You want to be okay? Councillor Oates and then Ms. Comas.
Okay.
Are you still there?
Then I missed.
I'm sorry. Councillor Patterson, you're next.
Thank you. My question is to Mr. Butterworth. Are we, and clarification on the motion, is it just the 5% penalty, and and have they claimed the owner's grant that will still be accepted? Okay, thank you.
Councillor Oates.
Okay, I believe that the way it was handled was the appropriate way for it to be handled, so I'm not sure what Councillor Greer is actually suggesting. My understanding, and I can be corrected if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that the request went to the Finance Department. The Finance Department looked at our policies, our bylaws, and says, I don't have the ability to do that. If you wish to do something that I don't have the ability to do, then you as a citizen need to take this to council just like anybody else could take any issue to council. So giving staff the direction to deal with it is really just telling staff to do exactly what they did, unless I missed something.
Councillor Greer.
Yeah, I believe there's a bylaw in place where if anybody is late, there's a penalty and they must pay. I assume that that's the case, and all I'm saying is that this is a one-off, and that from here on in, I don't think we should be refunding any money. I think we should stick with the bylaw and let the Finance Department handle it. Yeah, well, I don't know what the problem is.
Councillor, no, Mrs. Comas, and I rather suspect we're going to hear the word slippery slope at some point in time in this conversation.
No, you're not, actually, Your Worship. Just two things. First of all, if you're going to provide a grant and aid to Mr. Bitten, if we could do it on a without prejudice basis, please, so that we do not establish a precedent with this one. And secondly, Councillor Oates was correct in terms of we have We are legislated, that it is legislation, provincial legislation, that says that we cannot refund penalties for property taxes. That is established by law. We have no ability to waiver that. What council has the ability to do, in accordance with its own policies, is to provide a grant in aid, which is what you are doing in this particular case. So council has the authority under the community charter to delegate certain responsibilities to staff. If council does not wish to consider in the future any other applications for grants in aid with respect to refunds of property tax penalties, then council must establish that by bylaw to delegate the authority to consider those applications for grants and aid, because that's in essence what they are, to staff. At which time, staff would have the ability to point to the bylaw and say, council has delegated the authority for the consideration of these applications to staff, therefore they cannot go forward to council. As it sits, as a policy, we can try and enforce the policy, but if someone wants to come to council and make a request, then they can certainly make a request.
Councillor Greer.
I'd certainly be willing to make that motion once we settle on this motion. I don't think we've taken it.
Are we ready to call the vote? Councillor Powell.
So do I need to include without prejudice in that motion? Okay, so I'll include that, and I guess
Does
the
the
seconder
seconder agree with that without prejudice? Okay. Just before we call the vote, my comment is that I think it's a pretty good benchmark to give to a dying World War II 92-year-old veteran grant and aid of $110 who's never missed, to the best of our records, he's never missed a tax. He's never been late for a tax payment, at least for the time that staff could go back and check it out. So on that note, I'm going to call the vote. All those in favor of Councillor Powell's motion? Opposed? That is carried. Thank you. So, Councillor Greer.
So I'd like to make another motion that this refund ends here, and I guess, Ms. Comas, you'll have to work up something that, because I can't remember what you said, but if you can work up a motion regarding the fact that from this point on, the Finance Department will have the authority to go ahead without council's interest, I guess, or whatever.
Mr. Butterworth.
Thank you, Your Worship. I don't think the Finance Department would like to take on that responsibility, if I dare say. That we get a lot of requests for refunds. There's a lot of compelling arguments on whether a refund should be given or not, and it is a real challenge. Well, we have to say no to them because the legislation says that. If we're all of a sudden given the authority that we can give grants and aid, it is going to be really challenging at times to not award grant and aid, on how we're feeling that day or whatever. We're going to have to establish some parameters or something on why we're going to do it. But the legislation says that a penalty shall be charged, and I would really prefer not to be issuing grants and aids to be essentially reversing the penalty.
Mrs. Comas. Help.
Yes, Your Worship. I understand Mr. Butterworth's concerns, and I would not want council to delegate the authority to staff to issue a grant and aid. This would be delegating authority to the Director of Finance to not consider any further applications for relief from penalties. So it would be the opposite to that. It wouldn't be giving them a penalty. It would be saying that council's direction is not to give.
Councillor Oates.
Okay. So, assuming that motion was seconded, and then assuming that it was passed, how would it change what we have today? I suggest to you it doesn't change a thing. If the Finance Department is told to deny all applications or for waivers of tax for waivers of late penalties, that is no different than what happened here today. If we pass this and say, yes, you have the ability now to say no, and I get my tax notice next year, and I don't like it when he says no, I can write a letter to council, just like the daughter of this person did, and it comes before us at a regular council meeting, and we ask the finance department to give us a report, and we come back and we do the exact same thing we're doing here tonight. So I understand what you're trying to do, but I think what you're trying to do, we already have.
Councillor Greer.
Yeah, well, this is only a one-off grant and aid situation. All I'm suggesting is, yes, we'll go along with this one, but then we'll make up a bylaw stating that we'll no longer give grant and aid, no longer give consideration. Now, who looks after it, I don't know, but it just made sense that the finance would look after it. But I think it stops here. We give this one out, and that's it.
I think Councillor Oates' point is that doesn't matter even if you pass that, somebody could still say, I'm writing to council.
I would be against that, Councillor Greer, because it almost appears like we're blocking access to council to the people. That would be the effect of what you're doing, is blocking access of people to come before council and make their case, and I'd be against that.
No,
okay,
I'm not suggesting that they can't come to council. All I'm suggesting is that from here on in, council would just turn it down. We wouldn't debate it. We wouldn't have another motion.
Councillor Comas, Councillor Comas, Mrs. Comas.
Yeah, if that's the intent, Your Worship, then no, that wouldn't be. Then we couldn't enact a bylaw to accomplish that, because it's always council's purview to consider something that comes before them from a member of the public. So we couldn't legislate against doing that.
Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Worship. And I wholeheartedly agree with Councillor Oates and would not be supportive of the motion set forth by Councillor Greer at this point in time. And I'm just going to ask to call the question, because on $110 we have spent hundreds of staff dollar times, and on a bylaw that's, or the talk of one is beyond ridiculous.
Do you want to try and make that motion, or do you want to leave it alone?
Well, I was trying to make the motion that Ms. Gomez was talking about, and I don't know how it hasn't come out very clear, I assume. All I know is that I could see the frustration with Mr. Butterworth on what we were doing, and I was trying to eliminate that from this point on. And if we can come up with some reason or some way to do that, I would like to see that happen.
Mrs. Comas.
Your Worship, by putting this in a without prejudice basis, you're basically saying that you're doing it this one time and you're not going to do it again in the future. But you can't tie the hands of other councils who may choose to do it again.
Okay.
So I'll withdraw.
Thank you. Okay. All right, we're moving on. We have now the Mrs. Comas. We need the background on the Public Works Yard co-owner agreement with the Regional District of Nanaimo.
Yes, Your Worship. The purpose of this report is to obtain Council's authority to enter into an agreement with the Regional District with respect to co-ownership of property that is designated for construction of the proposed ERWS water treatment and intake. The project requires amalgamation of City of Parksville Public Works Yard with a portion of the ERWS lands that are directly adjacent to the Public Works Yard. The resulting amalgamated lot will be jointly owned by the City, 86%, and the Regional District, 14%. The proposed agreement is attached to the report for Council's information, and the recommendation is as per the Council agenda.
Do I have a mover and a seconder? Moved by Councillor Greer, seconded by Councillor Powell. Any questions? Fairly straightforward. Good partner with the RDN. Seeing no questions, I'll call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you. That is carried. Just before I read the next report and I get to the next two reports, they're both dealing with unsightly properties. Can we deal with them together? Because I don't want to spend any time. They come back year after year after year, and let's deal with it as quickly as we can so that we can get on with it. And any objection by members of council? I'll deal with I'll deal with items 6D and 6E all at the same time. They're both similar recommendations for different properties, but albeit it's the same thing. Moved by Councillor Greer, seconded by Councillor Oates. All those in favor? Oh, excuse me. We're combining them. Yeah. All those in favor? Thank you. That is passed.
Point of order. No, what I was asking, are we moving and seconding to vote on them together?
Yes.
Then that's the vote, and then you read the both, and then we vote on do we support them and do we have any questions, is how I understand.
No, I don't think so.
You don't have to. You can do it either way. So. Okay.
All right, so in that case, we'll deal with them individually. Pardon me? Okay, we'll ask the questions and then
And
we'll
so
call
one
the
of the
vote.
things that we've spent a lot of staff time, we've had this discussion over and over, every time this comes forward, do we have the ability to charge the people with the unsightly premises for what it costs us in time, in notices, in mailings, in our time, etc.? Do we have that ability?
Where council would have that ability would be in the fine structure. Now, the fines that we levy, it's a $100 fine per property. So in the case of 505 Belson, where it's 10 properties, it's a $1,000 fine. In the case of 403 Wembley, where it's one lot, it's a $100 fine. So the place where council, if council wanted to revisit the fine amounts for this particular charge, then we could certainly do that.
Okay. Okay, I'll call the vote. Oh, you have a question now. All right, go ahead. Thank you, Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Your Worship. I was just inquiring, the one has been ongoing for 8 years, the other one for 11 years. Have they been paying fines each year, or is this just being recorded every year?
No, Your Worship, from the time that we brought the fines in, they've been paying fines. And on 505 Belson, it is $100 a property.
Councillor Patterson.
Thank you. Question towards Ms. Comas. Are our fines legitimate, or they should be? I know that recently we looked at our fine structure and unsightly properties. Is this one that should be amended?
Well, that's strictly council's perspective, whether it should be amended or not. Staff put forward fines that they felt were reasonable and that were justifiable within the system if we had to go and defend it in court. But we can always, the establishment of fines is a fairly arbitrary process. So we try to establish a fine that acts as a deterrent and that is reasonable, that people aren't going to contest it, you know, and that meets our needs in terms of costs. But council is always free to.
Is there my question, I guess, is when you have repeat, I don't want to use the word offenders, but offenders, and that could we not have a fee structure that increases after a first, second, third offense?
Yes, we absolutely could have progressive. If council wishes us to look at that, then a motion would be in
So
order.
I'd like to make a motion that we look at a...
Could you hold that off until we deal with these two properties and get
Absolutely.
this motion out of the way? Thank you. I'm going to call the vote on these particular two motions. All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you. That is carried. Now, Councillor Patterson, make your motion.
The only thing with that is that I would have put the new fee structure in place, like with these properties. But I guess we can't because you haven't.
Wouldn't have happened right away.
And that,
We
so
can't be retroactive.
because you're going to clean them up. You're going to send them the bill.
Yep.
Okay.
And one of the properties has already paid its fine, so.
But they haven't cleaned up the property. But they will pay the fine. Is it, or the cleanup fee, or is that done by city staff?
No. From the adoption of this report, each property owner is given 10 days to clean up the property. At the end of those 10 days, if it hasn't been cleaned up, then we go out and hire a contractor to go in and do the work because we don't have the resources in-house to be able to do it. And then we send the bill to the property owner, and if it remains unpaid, it goes on their taxes for the year.
So at this time, I'd like to make a motion that we look at
Let staff provide a report
staff
to bring
provide
back
a report,
progressive
bring
fees,
back a
progressive fee structure?
fee for repeat property owner unsightly properties.
Okay, seconded by Councillor Greer. Any comments on the motion? Councillor Oates.
I have a motion a little later about bylaws too, and I sort of like that there. I don't know if we should be just limiting it to unsightly properties. I think the nut we're trying to crack is a repeat offenders. So if you got a repeat offender for any type of bylaw, should we just try to capture that? Now, just a suggestion. I'll support it either way.
I
Consider
would
that to be a friendly amendment?
amendment. Is that
Okay.
something that we can
Mrs.
pass
Comas,
on
you've got
to
that?
staff? Thank
So
you.
would be not only unsightly properties, but other repeat bylaw offenders, period. Okay. Any further comments or questions? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Thank you. That is carried. Okay, we've come to that point in the agenda where we are on the final report, I believe, and it has to do with the Englishman River Water Service update as a result of the July 30th Englishman River Water Services Committee recommendations to this council. Mr. Squire, would you please give us the background on the issue regarding Englishman River Water Service update?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. As you're aware, the project has essentially been on hold for approximately 9 months, awaiting several things: the DFO approval, financial funding from federal and provincial, and also waiting for public assent for borrowing. With that, in regards to the DFO application, I think we're in a very good position right now to have a full application submitted within the next 2 weeks to DFO. Our indications with staff at DFO, we feel that we will have approvals by the fall prior to the referendum date that we've established in the reports. And along with that, knowing that we've essentially lost those 9 months in the project implementation, we had to go back to the Island Health and ask for basically an extension of our deadline. Currently, right now, looking at the whole implementation, going right from where we are with design to fully construction and commissioning the water treatment plant, we've established a date of June 2018. There's certain project milestones within that, and some of those are limiting us for works in the river. There's only certain times that we can get approval in the river when we can go in there, and so that's typically June to early July of each year when we can actually physically construct that. So that, working backwards, we formally applied to the Island Health in regards to that project deadline. Going back last fall, what we did was essentially a financial model, taking the worst case scenario of that financial model and projecting that onto what it would cost the residents and businesses, including the development community. And it was essentially a reverse engineering exercise is what we did. We determined what Parksville, the community, could afford was essentially around $20 million for this project, and asked our consultant that we have retained what they could build for us. And they came with four different options. 2 of those options did not satisfy the Island Health requirement of full treatment, and the other 2, options 3 and 4, did. The ERWS board chose option 4, which we formally call Plan B, which is a reduced scale project for the water treatment plant. So essentially what they came back with, what we could afford for $20 million, was an 8 megaliter project of full filtration and 16 megaliters of disinfection, which would be ultraviolet disinfection and chlorination. With that,
now that the funding has been announced, that we have received $6 million in funding, it gave us a chance to go back to the table, knowing that with climate change and the uncertainties of that and conformance with island health regulations, it gave us a chance to revisit the 8 megaliters of filtration, which we did. We went back to the consultant, knowing that it is still at a conceptual level right now, and all the indications were to get it to a 16 megaliter is essentially what we'll need to get us from currently right now and bridge for the next 10 years. Would cost approximately an additional $4 million, raising the total project to $28.3 million. So what you have before you is essentially 2 reports. One is the implementation strategy that gets us from now to the end of the completion of the project with the new deadline, and also works with the referendum of November 21st, and also works with those critical project milestones when we need to be in the river. And then the other complementary report to that is the actual financial plan showing that $6 million of revenue and also that additional $4 million of expenses that would incur getting a project and a proper sized water treatment plant that would satisfy the community needs both now and hopefully in the next 10 years.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for Mr. Squire before I call for a mover or seconder? Councillor Green.
Yeah, just to clarify a couple of things. We spent over $5 million now, and is that part of the $28 million? Or is it $28 million beside the $5 million?
Currently, right now, all those costs for the engineering consulting are in the actual financial plan, so you can go back previous years. There have been a lot of extensive studies looked at the conceptual plan, piloting and determining what water treatment technology best suits the Englishman River, where the best location for the intake is. Part of that is also capital. That includes land acquisition of that parcel A that was on the previous report. And yeah, going forward, all the engineering costs are included in that $28 million.
So the money we've spent now is part of that $28 million?
That's the money that we have spent to date is currently in the 2015 financial plan and previous years, but going forward what we need to spend is also identified.
So we have to still spend $28 million, is what you're saying?
For the full project.
So yes. Yeah, so we're going to have to still spend another $28 million.
Yes, correct.
Which brings the total of spending to this point to 32 or 33.
I'd have to look and summarize the whole financial plan.
Okay, and I have another question. What happened to the aquifer storage at Beachcomber? Is that working or not working, or what happened there?
With the actual, when developing that actual well, and also in correlation with workload and also with the overall project, the aquifer storage and recovery at that project, we had some, when we were developing the actual well, required some further redevelopment. At that point in time, going forward, we didn't feel we had enough resources or time to actually look into that, and that we need right now, since we've lost essentially nine months to approximately a year on this project, that we're in a critical stage. If we don't get it built, what we need to focus on right now is the construction of the intake first, and then along with that, the compliance with building the water treatment plant secondly, and then once those are complete, then we'll revisit the ASR project.
Just a couple more follow-up questions. Can you explain the clear well tank sized for 24 million liters a day? Is that something new since we're not doing the underground storage?
No, clear well is actually a process after treatment. So After you filter, then you disinfect. There's a required volume of water that you need to store that disinfected water to have contact with. The chlorine needs to actually contact that water. And the clear well is actually a well, or essentially a cistern underneath the water treatment plant that would be built that we actually pump from. That's actually essentially used as a reservoir that we pump from to distribute to the above-ground storage tanks for the community.
Okay, thank you.
Interestingly enough, just a moment, Councillor Patterson. Interestingly enough, those questions were brought up at the ERWS committee meeting, and I wanted to say just a few more things about the aquifer storage and recovery. Mr. Squire, in a discussion with the professionals, we've got to get on. We've got to get that intake location built. That's our real priority. The transmission lines and the water treatment plant. And those are the real priority items. We've got to start taking water out of the river 12 months a year. But the ASR, for the time being, will go dormant. And at some other point in time, when these things are solved and out of the way and up and running, it would be my intention anyway to see that it worked on K Road. The aquifer wasn't big enough, but it did work, and I think it's got some potential. But we'll leave that for another time. Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have 3 or 4 questions. So my first question will be to you. We are receiving the report. Are we looking at a recommendation for the options in this report tonight?
No. If you read the recommendations, it's to proceed with the recommendations that were made by the ERWS committee.
Okay. So my next question is to Ms. Gomez, acting CAO. My understanding with going to referendum, even if it passed or didn't pass, that this is going forward.
I can answer that.
Thank you.
I've been talking to Dr. Hasselbeck of Public Health, and as early as last week. And I told him, I gave him an update. He'd been on holidays. I gave him an update. We got the money from the provincial and federal governments, and we're getting ready to proceed to build the intake location and the transmission lines, as well as the treatment plant itself. I reiterated to him that we were going to hold a referendum because although illogical as that is, under the local government charter or the local government act or whatever it's called, section 181 and 182, if we're borrowing a certain amount of money, we must hold a referendum. I repeated to him that I know from my inquiries that British Columbia is one of the only provinces that requires you to hold a referendum when you're borrowing money to provide potable water. Most other provinces don't do that. So that's an issue that I personally am not finished with, but the answer is yes. If the referendum fails, Dr. Hasselbeck of Public Health is going to come around and say, you've got to do it anyway.
So just a couple other little follow-ups. Yesterday in our community paper, there was a report, first page, that basically said that water rates would increase by maybe $10. And I'm not seeing that anywhere in like the report or anything. So I'm not sure if Mr. 2.5%. But said it would work out.
You're
to
correct.
about
That's not articulated, but that's what the 2.5% represents.
And I just think that needs to be communicated to the public through us a little bit more, and I just want to make sure that that's what we're looking at is the 2.5%, which would work out to X amount of dollars.
But the reporter was at the ERWS committee meeting and did report it.
Yes, Your Worship, we understand the importance of people seeing that in the public and in the communication strategy, and it will be included there, and people will be well informed that is the amount of money that.
Because I think that people don't understand 2.5%. No. They think that that's hundreds of dollars, and it's not. No.
One of the things that I wanted to point out to members of council who couldn't attend the ERWS committee meeting is that one of the commitments that is being made with regards to the report that we're going to adopt tonight, I hope, of July the 27th, with regard to the the implementation plan is that as an integral part, the ERWS Management Committee is being directed to work with the previously established community working group stakeholders to obtain meaningful feedback on the design development of the water treatment plant. So going forward, there'll be that kind of consultation carried out by our engineering department, Mr. Squire in particular, and the engineering departments, the water folk, and the RDN. So this will be an ongoing consultation process as we move forward. We'll be looking for input and looking for comments from everybody. So it's not a, it's certainly the collaboration and consultation aspect will be there. Any further questions or comments? Okay, I didn't have a mover and a seconder. I need a mover. Councillor Greer, a seconder. Councillor Powell. Any further questions or comments? Councillor Oates.
So I'm assuming that the motion is to adopt the 3 recommendations that are on the cover page of the Englishman River Water Service update. To adopt those 3 recommendations. And by adopting those 3 recommendations, we would be adopting the recommendations that are contained on page 2 of 6, the 6 of those, as well as the recommendations on the financial plan. I guess the 3rd one of that. Is that correct? So what we'd be, by a vote in the affirmative, would be adopting the 6 recommendations on page 2 of 6, and the 3rd recommendation on that other document, adoption of the ERWS revised 2015 to 2019 financial plan. Okay, I'm clear. I'm ready to vote.
Okay, we're going to call the vote unless there's any other questions or comments. All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you. That is carried. We have 2 bylaws for final adoption this evening, the Solid Fuel Appliance Regulation Bylaw 2015, number 1516, and the Bylaw Offense Notice Enforcement Amendment Bylaw 2015, number 1486.4. Do I have a mover and a seconder for the recommendation? Moved by Councillor Greer, seconded by Councillor Oates. All those in favor? Opposed? Okay, let's do that again. All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you. That is carried. All right, so we've disposed with the bylaws. New business. Does anyone have any new business for this evening?
Yes, I do.
Councillor Oates.
A couple items. I've had this on all along. I'd like to move that the special council meeting be held Monday, August 10th, 2015 at 6 p.m. in the forum of the Parksville Civic and Technology Center to consider amendments to the 2015 financial plan. I'd also move that staff undertake a review of the enforcement provisions of various city bylaws, including, but not limited to, property maintenance, street and traffic, nuisance abatement, and animal control, and recommend amendments to better address enforcement concerns in the city of Parksville.
Just clarification, you're asking staff to come back with a report? Okay.
Anyone else? Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Worship. I'd like to make a resolution regarding the August 27th Town Hall meeting, that in light of the work going forward with respect to the ERWS water intake and treatment plant and other capital projects, the August 27th, 2015 Town Hall meeting to discuss the vacant city lot on Jensen Street between Craig Street and the Alberni Highway be postponed to a future date.
Seconded by Councillor Oates. Any comments? Questions? Seeing none, all those in favor? Thank you. That is carried.
That's it.
Councillor Greer? No. Councillor Patterson? Okay. So I need a motion just get my notes